My name's Keelin McDonnell. I'm a product manager at Google Cloud. And if you're not familiar with it, Vertex AI, is it not? Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'm used to the Lavier Mech. So I'm a product manager at Vertex AI. So Vertex AI is Google Cloud's end-to-end AI ML platform. So if you stopped by our booth, you might have heard a few of these details earlier. But I just want to provide a little bit of context for all the capabilities that Vertex AI provides before we jump into what that means for your experience as a developer, building agents and interacting with LLMs. So this eye chart here just sort of represents the full stack of APIs and capabilities on Vertex AI. So you can see at the bottom we have a strong base of hardware, so that's where you get all your GPUs and TPUs that are either behind the scenes running the models for our APIs or that you're accessing directly to do your own work with your own models as a data scientist or AI ML developer. Moving up kind of the levels of extraction here, you have the model garden, which is where you're going to find all our pre-trained APIs like Gemini, as well as third-party APIs from partners like Anthropic and other open source providers like Meta. And then as you move further up here, you see that agent builder layer, and we're going to be talking a lot about sort of those two layers there, agent builder and model builder, how they fit together and how you can sort of use the tools in those boxes to build a really powerful interactive experience for your users with LLMs. And then at the very top, some of these things are more oriented for business users. The consumer equivalent is the Gemini app. So just out of curiosity, how many of you guys have used the Gemini app or Gemini through Google? Okay, so same model, just different delivery mechanisms. So that's kind of how we reach consumers and folks on our search engine. As a developer at an enterprise or a startup, you would come to cloud to use APIs to access that same powerful model. So at Vertex, we really focus on four pillars, and this is what we look to sort of for all of our products. Number one, the best models from Google as well as the industry. So you'll mention, you'll remember that I mentioned a few partners that we work with. We also have hundreds of open source models. We have an integration with Hugging Face. It's really important for us to bring you the great models that we build, but also the great models that our partners and other folks in the industry bring. We think that whatever model fits your use case is the one that we want to help you deploy your application with, and so we've really strived to make the platform fairly agnostic in terms of the provenance of your model, as long as you can get it working on Vertex. End-to-end model building. What we really mean by model building is this is a place to tune your model. This is a place to manage your model. This is a place to manage APIs, whether it's a private endpoint you set up on your own model or using one of our public APIs. Developing agents faster, and I'll kind of pause on that one and talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then finally, built on a foundation of enterprise readiness. So, for folks out there that are building LLM applications, you know that a lot of sensitive data is coming in with those prompts. A lot of sensitive information is flowing out. We want to make sure that we have the best security for your business and your users. And so that's really core to the offerings that we have on Vertex. And just highlighting some of the recent product announcements we've had. I'm sure you probably hear a lot about Gemini in the news, but Vertex is Gemini plus so much more. We have other first-party models like Imagine, which we've been featuring at our booth this week. We also have APIs supporting our agent builder flows, which we'll take a look at here in a minute, including a RAG API and an agent builder API, and then a few other features there. So if it's been a while or your main kind of knowledge of Google Cloud is Gemini, this is a great opportunity to check out what's new. All right, so with that precursor, you're all semi-experts on Vertex. You're ready to hear a little bit more about what we're doing in the agent space. So just out of curiosity for folks in the audience, I know there's been a lot of agent sessions. How many of you have built an agent or built some sort of agentic system? Okay, a couple. Okay, pretty good. How many of you used an agentic system? How many of you have used an LLM-based chatbot? Well, news for you. If you've used an LLM-based chatbot, you have definitely used an agentic system. They're the lifeblood of how our application and many other providers work. It's really not possible to have an effective LLM-based chatbot without agentic workflows, and we'll give some pretty concrete examples of that here in just a minute. So I like to start with our definition of an agent. You've probably heard approximately 500 definitions of agents if you've been to these sessions. I don't know that anybody has quite landed on the gold standard. We're all kind of working towards a common definition. But the way that we think about it is that for us, it's an application that has a goal, looks at the inputs, and has a bunch of tools to kind of figure out how to execute that output. And this is a smart system in the sense that, when you look at where we were at with kind of raw LLMs, basically the knowledge that an LLM has is its pre-training set, and that was sort of where we were at the dawn of LLMs 2 years ago. Agentic abilities really extend that to the broader universe of APIs and information that is both public and proprietary. So probably many of you first heard about agents from Andrew Ng's talk that was all over Twitter and YouTube. If you haven't checked it out, it's kind of like the OG kind of introduction to agents. I highly recommend it. I think what I really like about this talk is that he kind of presented a vision for where agents are going. A lot of the things that he talks about there don't exist today, and folks are still debating how close we are and what we need to do to get there. But what he does a fantastic job of is really describing how agents amplify the usefulness of LLMs. And I think as developers, we're all trying to figure out how, we have arguably one of the most powerful technologies ever invented, but how do we turn it into applications that people can use? We're still in that sprint to kind of figure that out, and agents have been a really promising path forward for a lot of folks. All right, so with all that, we want to kind of take a step back and talk a little bit about what does it look like to go from a world of pure raw LLM to a world of agents. So if you remember maybe your first time using an LLM-based chatbot, probably a year and a half ago, maybe early 2024, late 2023, you might have gotten a message like this that said, if you asked it, hey, who won the basketball game yesterday, or what's the weather like in San Jose, you'd get an answer that says, actually, I only know about the world from about 6 months ago, and that's because that was when the model's pre-training data set stopped. So there was no additional information and really no effective way at that point for LLMs to get more information about the world. You had information from prior to that, but nothing more. And so another shortcoming that you probably have seen, especially in the past, was asking for links to outside websites, or even asking an LLM to examine content on a URL, a video, things like that. And essentially, there was just no way for LLMs to deal with that information. And then another one very familiar to many developers is consistent output. So you want a JSON blob, you want some XML, you tell the LLM, which has trillions and trillions of tokens of information, please give me this in this format, and it can't quite do it. Very frustrating. So this was kind of where we were at, call it early 2023, when we first all started kind of hearing about LLMs. There was a world where we could kind of go online, interact with an LLM, either through a chatbot or through an API, get information that LLM had as of its pre-training date cutoff, and then we were kind of stuck. So what the sort of new thinking around agents has brought us into is a world in which we are no longer stuck at that point of where the pre-training data sends. And again, because agents and agentic workflows is such a broad term, I really like this kind of summary because it helps, just sort of categorize all the things that agents have access to. So for us, an agent is really built from the stack of the model, which has kind of the core basic information about the world, tools, which is typically another way of saying it knows about a bunch of APIs and can make function calls, orchestration, meaning it can piece all that together and give you the information in a coherent format that you want, and then runtime, meaning that it can all execute where you want it. So when we think about this from the Vertex angle, how do we give our users a really great experience around building agents and putting all these parts together? We really start with flexibility and choice. So for one, we want to point users to the best model. So many folks start with Gemini, many folks start with other models. There's a lot of different reasons why one model might make sense for one use case versus another. But really, the important thing there is that we're offering offering a platform experience that helps you put those pieces together to ultimately get to your agent. So it's not about prescribing one specific set of tools or models, but rather giving you all the options to put together what is going to make sense for your use case. So you're choosing your model at this point. You're choosing whether or not you want to tune. So for a managed model, that's typically doing something like supervised tuning. For an open model, that might be doing something even more like fully fine-tuning your model. And then, of course, evaluation, which is really going to be key because you want to know if your agent is actually doing a good job. You're going to define your tools with function calling. And so this is where, kind of the critical step comes in of extending the knowledge and usability of the model. So if the model is unable to, call out to these additional tools and APIs, it's, again, stuck in that spot of only knowing what it knows in its pre-training data set. If you're able to set up these function calls, then the universe of knowledge and information that the model has access to expands dramatically. And so you, as a developer, have this amazing toolkit now to build on top of a really strong foundation in the model, but also provide it with specific APIs and tools that are going to give it information contextual and interesting for your use case. So an example of this might be if you have a bot that answers questions about the weather, you might give it access to a bunch of APIs from the National Weather Service or other forecasting channels. If you're building a bot about retail, you might give it information about pricing or your catalog. So, what APIs and what functions are going to be make sense for your use case are really up to you, and that's kind of the power of function calling for these agentic workflows. It's a toolkit for you to make something that is incredibly powerful, an LLM, even more powerful because it's built just for your use case. Once you've got all that set up, you can then use LangChain on Vertex AI. So just out of curiosity, you got any LangChain users in the house here? Okay, yeah. So what's LangChain on Vertex AI versus LangChain? We offer LangChain on Vertex AI as a managed service to give enterprise developers version control and other conveniences. So it's all the things that you love about LangChain, but just offered in a more enterprise-friendly and convenient format running on the Vertex AI platform. So for orchestration and for putting together all your agent workflows, you get all the convenience and sort of all the same features that you're used to working with LangChain, but with that additional layer of enterprise support. And then finally, once you've got all these pieces in place, you're ready to deploy your agent to Vertex AI. So the great thing about Vertex AI, again, is that you go through all these pieces, as sort of a prototype step. You're doing your testing, your eval, and then you have the full might of the Vertex AI and Google Cloud stack to scale. So initially, that might only require, X amount of capacity, but over time, as your business grows, as your application or your users grow, it's easy enough to scale up and make that application work for orders of magnitude more users. So again, as I mentioned earlier, function calling is really about developer control and flexibility. So it really kind of hits the sweet spot on a lot of things that developers want to do with LLMs, but are hard to do with raw LLMs out of the box. So that includes structured outputs, as we mentioned earlier, getting well-formatted JSON out of these models, information retrieval, so putting these in a RAG system, all sorts of different use cases there that you see on the right, going all the way to the right there, which is ultimately the goal of like a completely autonomous workflow where agents can potentially even work together to make decisions on your behalf. Just a few use cases. Some of these probably feel pretty familiar. You might have either built or used use cases that are in these industries, but using these for financial use cases. Travel is a very common one. If you've used the Gemini consumer app, you've probably used the Expedia plugin. That's exactly what this is. It's an agentic workflow that's making use of the Gemini model combined with the Expedia APIs. And then also more on the business side, you see these connected with databases, documents, private information that you only want to expose to your business or your customers. So it can really range in terms of the information that you might want to be able to add into your agent, and that's really your choice as a developer. With these toolkits, you would be able to do that. And then this is just a quick example here that kind of walks through, again, a pre-agent, pre-kind of function calling world and a post. So again, on the left there, you see an example where it's the model without any support from function calling or agentic workflows, and it doesn't really know the answer. It just says, sorry, I don't have information about the Pixel 8. On the right, you see an example with function calling where the model is actually making an API call to recent pricing data, recent SKU data about the Pixel 8, and it's able to give an accurate and comprehensive answer. And then a similar example here using more proprietary data. So this is an example using Google Drive and Google Sheets, but you could easily use this for any sort of spreadsheet storage system. You're actually accessing the data here that is in your Google Drive folder. You can see here it's a PDF invoice, so it's doing some OCR on that and then turning that into data. And then eventually you're actually able to get some information out of that based off of the fact that the function call is able to access that information. And then another example here, very similar, using a SQL database. So this is just to kind of give you a sense of the range. It's kind of one capability, function calling within this framework, but it can do so much sort of depending on the information that you want to access with it. So just to kind of zoom back and kind of summarize what we've seen here in some of these examples, kind of end-to-end, what is the function calling actually doing? So at the very beginning, and you've probably had this experience as a user of consumer chatbots, you're putting in some kind of prompt. So maybe it's, how do I get concert tickets in this town? Or, how much of our monthly budget have we spent this month? That prompt is then going to the model. In this case, we're using Gemini in the example. The model is looking at it and basically deciding, can I answer this question with my with the base of knowledge that I have in my pre-training set, or do I need to use a function call to extract external information? It makes that decision without asking you, which is really the magic of these systems. And then if it does decide that it needs to make an external call, it goes ahead and does that. And again, these are typically API calls, going to a database, going to a document repository like your Google Drive, as you saw there. And so this entire flow obviously happens in a second or two, and when you're using a chatbot, you barely notice the kind of time that passes between when you make the request and when you get your response. But in the background, the model is doing all this work to retrieve this information for you and then deliver it back. And so, again, kind of going back to how LangChain supports these workflows as well, when you are defining your function call, you can use LangChain to do these things using LangChain templates and ultimately deploying to Vertex. And so what that actually looks like in the code there is pretty simple. It's just a handful of lines of Python there. And again, the thing to kind of emphasize here with the functions and the templates is that this can be repeated many times over for many different types of external sources that you might be using. So you're not sort of reinventing the wheel every time you go to build an application and think, oh, I need my model to know about this data or this source of information. How am I going to implement that? How is it going to work with this thing? It's all very straightforward because you're using the same framework over and over again to make those external calls. And again, the nice thing about LangChain on Vertex is that you're doing it in this kind of enterprise safe environment, but with, if you're an experienced LangChain user, all the features of LangChain that you know and love. So again, full control as you're operating with the developer. You're defining your functions, all the parameters, all the API calls, and then ultimately, once you've made those definitions, created those templates, set up the initial work, the model itself is making the decisions when the prompts come in about when to actually retrieve information from different sources. So it's an incredibly powerful way to extend the knowledge of your LLM without actually having to build a brand new LLM. And again, using these frameworks, using function calling, using LangChain, you really avoid writing a lot of throwaway code over and over again for the same kinds of tasks. Instead, you're just using these templates to implement nearly identical types of workflows. We have about just a few minutes here, so I want to take you through one final example, which I think is really powerful. This is an example that was given to us from one of our customers who is a market researcher. So for those of you that don't know, market researchers essentially conduct these massive polls with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of participants, and they ask them all sorts of questions. So we all know polls from like political opinions and those types of things, but they ask all sorts of things like preferences around shoes, what kind of weather people like, all sorts of things. So these are massive organizations that run these very large scale polls and have huge data science teams creating outputs from that polling and reporting from that polling. So they have an obvious need for LLMs. They have massive data. They have a customer base that wants to consume that data in a less technical way, typically in natural language. But LLMs were not very good for them to work with initially, and you can imagine why that would be, because most of the secret sauce of their business is in private data, which the LLM has no access to. So this is where the agentic workflows really came in to provide a lot of value for this business. So they've got tens of thousands of these interviews, as I mentioned, hundreds of thousands of answers to questions, and they have to turn these into reports for their enterprise clients. How do they do that quickly and responsively in a way that really scales? So this is a little bit of what their data looks like too. This is the other challenge is that not every survey looks the same, and a lot of survey is in very, very large spreadsheets. So this is not necessarily super, super well organized data or traditionally organized data in a database. So here's where they were at when they first started experimenting with LLMs. They found they got not super great answers. The UX was not very good because they were sort of putting in prompts. The team was not very experienced with writing prompts, and the level of specificity required to get an accurate answer was just too high. And frankly, the model just didn't know a lot about what they did as market researchers. There were very specific workflows and preferences around language and style that, out-of-the-box LLMs just didn't quite meet their needs. So what they did was they took Gemini and they created an agentic workflow using tools, using code interpreter, using function calling to essentially take the power of the model and extend it with their APIs, with their databases, with their sources of information, and tune the model as well with examples of their previous reporting. And so what they ended up building was this custom chatbot that you see here. So this is just for their employees. And what's going on in the background is that it's got access to the core base of information that Gemini always has access to, and then a series of different data sources that are specific to their business. And so analysts on their team were then able to use this custom chatbot, ask questions that were fairly generic, not like super prompt engineered or anything like that, just sort of phrased in a natural way that the analyst would talk. And using all this implementation, they were able to get really accurate and helpful answers. So the lessons that kind of came out of this process, I think it was about a 6-month process going from the original LLM implementation to what they ultimately built, was that, typically LLMs alone are not the approach. And I think most applications now, I would dare say, maybe not quite all, are some sort of agentic workflow, just because you really need to enrich the knowledge of the LLM to be effective and useful for users. To drive performance and differentiation, they really needed control. So you noticed that in that previous example, I had all these details about different places they got data and how they got it incorporated in the answer. I didn't say, for example, oh, we told them to put all their data in one format and get it in this one place. That's just not feasible for most customers, and it was much more convenient for them to say, we're going to let our data live where it lives, and we're going to use tools to make that data available to the LLM to be minimally disruptive to our existing storage and workflows. And then finally, as I mentioned, this was a trial and error process. There were many different designs over the course of implementing this. New frameworks came out, new products came out, new models came out. I think this is like a typical kind of workflow that you see with LLMs. If you wait 2 months, everything is completely different. So luckily, our customer in this case was very open to innovation and change, and was really willing to work with us to create the best possible experience. So ultimately, we were able to help them build this tool that has reduced the workload of their agents by hundreds and hundreds of hours per week. All right, we're down to the last 12 seconds here. So if you're interested in trying any of those products, I'd encourage you to scan this QR code. That's going to take you to a free trial for Vertex. So anybody who's new to Google Cloud, you do get $300 in credits. I just did the math with my colleague this morning. That's over 1 billion tokens on Gemini. So just saying, that's a lot of tokens. So give it a try if you haven't already. And then finally, if you're a Google Cloud fan, we have an innovators program that gives you, as a developer, updates, access to product experts, access to pre-release trials. So if that's something you're interested in, I definitely encourage you to sign up there. And with that, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Keelin. And we do have time for a question or two. So I believe Asad is over here with a microphone. So if you have a question, make eye contact. Here we go. We have a question up in the front, and we also have Jailson, who has microphone over there too. So
yeah. So as it makes these decisions about what APIs to call and how to parameterize what gets sent in as input, there could be other things that you have to manage, right? Like an API key or permissions and all of that. So how does that get factored in?
So you have to provide that in the template. So obviously, yeah, if you don't have a, sorry, if you don't have, so that gets provided in the template. So you make a good point, which is part of what you establish when you set up those templates is authentication for the APIs. So you do have to make sure that you have access to all the tools, whether it's an API or a database or whatever. If you have a lot of different things that you need to access, that can be a little bit more complex, but it is a mostly one-time thing that you need to do to set up.
What about the permissioning?
The permissioning, you mean giving permission for the model to make the call and access the?
No, more like, hey, am I authorized to look at this data?
That's provided, yeah, that's provided on the data level. So the database needs to, or the drive or whatever the SQL database, whatever you're providing, needs to provide access to the, essentially the framework that's making the call, yeah. Yeah.
We have time for one more question before. Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Great talk. Quick question around for multi-agents. Is there a way to
closer to the mic?
For multi-agents, is there a way to share context between the agents and to coordinate them?
Sorry, I missed the last part. Is there a way to
coordinate, like if you have multiple agents?
Great, yeah, great question. Yes-ish. I would say that the general consensus, and you can read a ton of papers on Archive about multi-agent coordination, is that that people have shown some success in multi-agent coordination, but it's definitely more of an area of a work in progress. Single agent calling, where you're making, or maybe even making two different calls, is a lot more straightforward. For various reasons that you can imagine. Basically, the multi-agent workflows start to get pretty complex just in terms of the decision mechanisms and maintaining state and all that kind of stuff. But there's an absolute ton of research in this area. I would be surprised if it wasn't more solved than not in the next few years, but it's still not 100%. Yeah.